song because I think that that is something that's important. So with that, we've got some people on YouTube. We've got some folks here in the Crowdcast. So I'm going to be going around here and there, to different people asking questions. The live streams are usually going to be between like 30 and 75 minutes, or not 30, an hour and 75 minutes, sorry, 60 to 75 minutes. Okay, so that's going to tend to be the length of the stream. So this is going to wrap up, Cindy, sometime between 7:30 and 7:45. Okay, I'm usually going to be about an hour, usually a little bit more. Okay, so as far as that goes, can the questions span? Yeah, the thing is, if I don't have any questions about the road to civil war, certainly I'm not going to say that's all I'm going to talk about, right? This is America, we're about freedom here and all of that kind of stuff, right? So, but the thing is, what I'm noting is that those questions are going to get priority, okay? So as far as that goes, somebody made a note earlier that this all started when we started to remember the Alamo, okay? And I think that that's something that is an important thing to note when we're thinking about Texas annexation and the Mexican-American War. I think that these are important things, okay? So let me go ahead, and since we don't have any questions yet, or we didn't a second ago, I'm going to go ahead and, address that, okay? So when we look at the idea of manifest destiny. Okay, let me go and introduce this idea of manifest destiny in case we forgot. Okay, so as far as that goes, now foreign policy review, Jeffrey, I've got foreign policy is the topic for Wednesday. So keep that in mind. Foreign policy is the topic for Wednesday. Gilded Age and Progressive Era is the topic for tomorrow. So those are some things I like having emphasis topics because it just puts us in a situation where we're not doing the same thing every time. Elroy knows what's up. All right. So as far as that goes, manifest destiny, okay, that manifest. Now, of course, people say today, you folks in the TikTok generation, I'm manifesting a 5, okay? Me, I'm manifesting destiny. Now, manifest means that something is obvious, it's plain, it just could not be more obvious. And destiny, okay, fate. So you could think of the United States manifesting destiny, that it is our destiny to go from sea to shining sea, and we are just going to manifest that a little bit, okay? Just like we're going to manifest some 5s, okay? I'm going to manifest getting Romulus APUSH review to number 1, from number 8 there. So one thing that we want to bring up is American American exceptionalism. Okay, so when we're thinking about American exceptionalism, that is this idea that the United States is a special country, not that we're just one of many countries, but the United States is not that much different than ancient Israel, for example. Like, when you think about the children of Israel being chosen by God, right? That they are chosen for a special purpose. So people who believe in American exceptionalism don't just think that the United States is one of many countries, but a special country. And we see this, so again, special and unique among nations, not just different, okay? Now, this was a funny thing that happened, I guess about 15 years ago. Don't do drugs, kids, don't drink, it's all bad for you. But the Absolute Vodka Company, they made this ad. They were trying to sell more vodka in Mexico, and they thought, well, you know what? They'd probably find it funny if we just put like the original territory of Mexico in an absolute world, kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. But what they didn't take into account is the internet. Okay, so by 2008, there's an internet. All right, so then this gets to the United States, where people don't appreciate it that much. This ad got pulled, but it does, kind of make a joke about something that is a very serious matter, no matter how you interpret it, that a substantial portion of the United States was at some point, was part of the original Mexican state that was proclaimed in 1821. And of course, like this manifest destiny begins in 1803. And what happens in 1803? The the first territorial acquisition of the United States, the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, so that's the United States in 1803. Now, 1803 is a great date to remember because I consider this a 2-for-1 date. 1803 is the Louisiana Purchase and Marbury v. Madison. Okay, Louisiana Purchase and Marbury v. Madison. Just like with 1848, you get the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ends the Mexican-American War, and you get the Seneca Falls Convention, which releases the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments in favor of women's rights, including women's suffrage in the United States. Now, Jefferson, in his first inaugural address, said that the United States is kindly separated by nature in a wide ocean from the exterminating havoc of 1/4 of the globe. He's talking about Europe, for those of you who don't get his drift. Possessing, note here, a chosen country with room enough for our descendants to the 1,000th and 1,000th generation. And so Jefferson, is talking about the United States. And what's interesting is Jefferson is not a Christian per se, but there are a lot of Christian undertones in his thinking when he starts talking about this idea of a chosen country. And of course, he expresses this idea of divine providence. So he was a deist, but somebody who believed very strongly that God had set things into motion and had somehow planned for the United States to exist. So the Louisiana Purchase basically, acquires all of this farmland and expands the United States west of the Mississippi. And of course, you expand that far, then, why not just grab the rest of it later on? And so one thing that you see here that he notes, that God, led our forefathers as Israel of old from their native land and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessaries and comforts of life. When you look back into, the first books of the Bible, the Torah, and you hear them talking about the promised land and this land flowing with milk and honey, which the United States certainly is rich in natural resources. When we think about oil, coal, all of these things, the United States does have an abundance of resources. So again, that plays right into the hand of people who believe in manifest destiny, American exceptionalism. So by 1854, this is the United States. And so this basically, the continental United States, as it is now, was settled by 1854. So this 51-year period. So that's what we just want to make a note of that. And that begins, with the Texas independence movement. And so the slides get a little old here, but again, when you think about Texas independence and the Lone Star State, now, of course, the United States annexes Texas, and that's going to lead to the Mexican-American War. Now, let's go ahead and see if we've got, any questions here. Looks like we've got a few questions. So as far as that goes, antebellum reform would be something. Oh, Jackson, I tell you what. Now, yes, I would say that we've got some talk in the YouTube chat. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry definitely, accelerated the Civil War. It was something that, just like the Brooks Sumner incident, where Preston Brooks just beats the mess out of Charles Sumner, that's something that, when we're thinking about, making people's kind of stereotypes and such, right? That they have these stereotypes of Southerners and Northerners. And although a lot of Northerners condemned John Brown's raid, in the South, it was seen as, John Brown is actually, Southern whites saw that John Brown was a representative of Northerners, that basically the North was supporting him. They had put him up to it, when really, most public opinion in the North was not for that sort of thing. Remember that Abraham Lincoln and several other influential Northerners were what we call free soilers. Okay, now more recently we've talked about containment, the policy of containment in the Cold War. Now the policy of containment, that says that we're not going to attack Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union, but we are going to stop communism from expanding from its current borders. And in a similar way, free soilers during the antebellum period, they believed that, look, I don't like slavery, but it's not like we're going to be able to do anything about it right now. And even, a lot of Republicans, like, more moderate Republicans like Abraham Lincoln, they believed that that was a state issue. Even though Lincoln gave his House Divided speech where he said, look, that eventually we will either be all slave or all free. He never called for any kind of action to suddenly abolish slavery. So what we want to say, Elroy, when we're talking about abolitionism, we want to be clear. Now, William Lloyd Garrison published the newspaper The Liberator in the 1830s. Now, a few things about that. We want to note that before the 1830s, there was not an abolitionist movement. Now, the northern states, after the American Revolution, they gradually emancipated, except for, I think, Massachusetts and Vermont did it more immediately. But most of the northern states, after the American Revolution, they passed laws that put into place gradual emancipation. So even though the laws passed in the 1880s, the laws passed in the 1880s, that this is something that when they didn't really take effect, the 1780s, that they didn't really take effect until the 1830s, 1840s. And so in the 1830s, this is when those gradual emancipation laws are actually starting to take effect in the North. The abolitionist movement starts up. In the abolitionist movement, William Lloyd Garrison says that basically slavery is wrong, and we want to appreciate the Second Great Awakening as a causal factor, because the Second Great Awakening says that, look, you have a choice to sin or not sin. You have a choice between good and evil, and this choice between good and evil could go into whether you go to heaven or go to hell. I'm going to heaven, Lieutenant Dan. So with that, the Second Great Awakening gives rise to this abolitionist movement, which is something that is going to say that let's get rid of slavery now, let's get rid of slavery throughout the United States, and let's not compensate slaveholders or anything like that. And so, of course, this is something, I'll often talk about Newton's third law when I'm talking about history. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the reaction in the South is it becomes more common during this time for, Southern slaveholders to not be reluctant as Jefferson was. Okay, so when we go back to the Missouri Compromise, Jefferson, in his retirement, he was talking about how, look, I don't like slavery any more than anybody else, but I don't see a way out of it. He said, if I saw any practical way that we could get out of this, I would, but we've got the wolf by the ear. Okay. Jefferson saying that, when you've got a wolf by the ear, when you let go of that ear, that wolf's going to eat you. Okay. And so that's something that, kind of like Goldilocks or whatever, right? So with that, that wolf, you don't want to get eaten like Goldilocks. And so you want to make sure that, hey, so Jefferson, he wasn't proud of slavery or anything like that. But again, this sort of thing, you go from the founding generation, Jefferson and Madison and Washington being self-conscious about slavery. And then you've got a generation of slaveholders that they start defending the institution as something that is in line with nature. So this begins, part of that, part of this process going into the Civil War. Now, again, some other abolitionists, which some prominent Black abolitionists were Frederick Douglass, of course, who wrote his Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, and was also a very popular orator. An abolitionist orator, and then David Walker, who wrote David Walker's Appeal to the colored citizens of the world, where he basically, said that, look, the only way we're going to get rid of this is to have a slave rebellion. So with that, let's go ahead and note that. And great, let's see. Emily, always good to see you. And, I always know when we've got a teacher question here. Now, one thing, if we think about like how the Second Great Awakening is, participating in this going west, okay? And I'm just going to try to answer this as well as I can on the fly, Emily. Sometimes, it's like Emily's been doing these things for a while. It's great having her here. I think sometimes she's trying to get me, like find something that I can't answer, So one thing about the Second Great Awakening, it did kind of appeal to frontier life because we don't really have, you think about the pandemic when we were all isolated and told not to gather and all of that stuff, that what do? We started watching Netflix. We started ordering things on Amazon, right? We get on the internet and watch, funny videos on YouTube or whatever, but these people didn't have that. When you moved out to the frontier, that was a lonely, lonely life. And if you consider the context of the temperance movement, these people got on the frontier and there's not a whole lot else to do but drink. The average American drank about twice as much alcohol, I think 2 to 3 times as much alcohol as the average American drinks now. I'm not any kind of mathematician or medical professional. I'm just kind of going from memory there, but there was a very big problem. And so with that, the Second Great Awakening focused on these camp meetings, okay? So what this did is it created this massive social occasion. So when these Second Great Awakening preachers would go out onto the frontier, then it's like, okay, we're going to have a camp meeting that we're all going to camp out for a few days. There's going to be this huge, like very festive gathering. Some people are going to yell and scream at us and say, you're all going to hell. All right. And, so with that kind of thing, that is what's going on here. And so that's something that I think is kind of interacting with frontier life. Okay, so it's interacting with frontier life, but I wouldn't put like too much emphasis on relating the Second Great Awakening to westward expansion. I would be thinking more in terms of like, that is, the exam is most likely going to note this as a causal factor for the antebellum reform movements. Okay, now as far as that goes, that question that uses to the extent. Now the thing is a continuity. Yeah, so I don't want to get too much into the question formats here, which I did a symposium over the weekend, which was 4 sessions, each of which focused on the exam. I would have to see the actual questions in order to be able to give appropriate commentary there, because to the extent can also be used in a change over time question, right? So I would have to withhold judgment on that. Can I go over what led to the Missouri Compromise? Okay, so the Missouri Compromise, that is, of course, Missouri is trying to get into the Union as a slave state. Okay, so Missouri is, so far you've only had Louisiana brought into the Union west of the Mississippi. And so, from there, when we're thinking about the Missouri Compromise, this is, basically Missouri is trying to come into the Union, all right, and they want to be a slave state. Now, when we look at a map of free and slave states, we want to consider this because you go all the way back to the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Okay, so the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, this was the first time, this was under the Articles that, there was a law that was passed to restrict the expansion of slavery. Okay, so there was a law passed to restrict the expansion of slavery. So going from there, let's think about this. So there was a precedent for saying that slavery should not expand into this area. So the Missouri Compromise, if we look at the trajectory, I made this map myself in like 2008, 2009, I think. I was really proud of it at the time, but I'm still going to use it because it brings back some good memories for me. So with that, we look at the free states and we look at the slave states and we look at Missouri. If we think about the idea of trajectory, okay, if you think about, a comet's trajectory or something like that, That is something that, this is, you can kind of see where the comment's going. And so if we think about the idea of, trajectory, that's, we think about the idea of trajectory, you think, okay, Missouri kind of looks like it should be a free state. So Missouri, it's like you have to kind of go up. You'd have to swing up in order to make Missouri a slave state. And so, you can see where there is a jurisdictional issue where people are very, very divided. Now, on one hand, you can see that part of Missouri is just right across the river from Memphis, Tennessee. Well, Memphis, I guess, maybe a little farther south, Memphis, Tennessee, and Louisville, Kentucky. So, there's this thing here. And what happens is the Talmadge Amendment, okay, basically was introduced in order to, give Missouri kind of a gradual emancipation law, okay, that basically everybody born after this state's admitted in the Constitution will be free at 25 years. Now, note the Talmadge Amendment, this is 1819. This is before the Abolitionist Movement. There is not this is not abolition, okay? This is just the idea that let's kind of continue the Northwest Ordinance, right? Let's kind of continue the Northwest Ordinance by saying that Missouri, we don't want to mess with, and the other thing, it's kind of practical from the Northern perspective because they're not trying to mess with slavery right there, but it's just, it gives them 25 years to kind of deal with it. And so when you look here, now remember before the Compromise of 1850, there was this idea of a parity, almost, pairs, like basically bringing the states in pairs and having a balance between the free states and the slave states. Now, that's something that the Mexican-American War, that's over, okay? That's where you've got the Wilmot Proviso after the Mexican-American War. And so that is what leads to the Missouri Compromise. Now, again, the Missouri Compromise, they are really at a standstill because what happens was that the House passes the Missouri bill with the Talmadge Amendment, and the Senate passed the Missouri bill without the Talmadge Amendment. Remember that before the Civil War, the Senate had pretty much a balance of representatives of free and slave states, whereas when we get into the antebellum period, the free states have a larger population. And so that's when Henry Clay shows up and he gets his first compromise under his belt. Now, Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser, okay? And so what Henry Clay does here is he says, let's admit Missouri as a slave state, okay? Then we will admit Maine as a free state. Now, Maine used to be part of Massachusetts. Massachusetts was basically, just kind of divided. New Hampshire gave like a little, was a colony. It had a little port there. But other than that, Maine had been a district of the state of Massachusetts. So at the end of the day, this is all about political power. It's not about ideology or anything like that. It's about political power, that New England, seeing that they have an opportunity to pick up 2 more senators, they are willing to allow Missouri to come in as a slave state. Because remember, the Louisiana Purchase, in a way, kind of signs New England's death warrant, that New England is, going to perpetually be a minority in the country because there's nowhere for New England to expand. So New England gets 2 more senators, sure. And then in an effort to kind of solve the issue and not have to keep coming back and talking about it, prohibits slavery in the territories of the Louisiana Purchase north of the 3630 parallel. So that's something that when we're looking at the Missouri Compromise, and of course Jefferson is very, very wary of what's going on here. Now, to answer another question, okay, somebody is asking, when did the antebellum period occur? And I'm so glad that you're saying this, Karina, because one thing that I find very, very important is if we're thinking in terms of, when the College Board says this is period 1, this is period 2, period 3, the exam isn't real. The exam never mentions a numbered period. So I think it's very important to think about these different eras of U.S. history. And so when we think about the antebellum period, that is that time between 1820 and 1860. and antebellum means before the Civil War. Okay, so antebellum means before the war or before the Civil War. And so going from there, yes, I'm sharing the screen. Okay, so with that, the antebellum period is, from 1820 to 1860. It is a period, that 40-year period. And note, it begins with the Missouri Compromise, okay? And remember Jefferson's phrase there, the wolf by the ear. We have the wolf by the ear. Jefferson, a slaveholder, but a reluctant slaveholder. It's just he opposed it on moral grounds, but he didn't see a way to get out of it, okay? And, almost one of those ways to make a Parks and Rec reference, the way that Ron Swanson hates government, but he's a government employee, but he hates everything about government. So 1820 to 1860 is this period before the Civil War. All right, so as far as that goes, let's see what we've got here. What made the U.S. delay the annexation of Texas? Now, what I think is very important here is to, one of the things that I teach, and I think that it's a tragedy really in a lot of ways, that the APUSH curriculum has become so painfully formulaic, and there's always this like, oh, this is what you need to know, or something like that. And it's like the whole idea of deep learning of U.S. history so often gets lost. And one of the things that I often note is when we look at the political culture of the 1830s and the political culture of the 1850s, I actually have, if somebody were to ask me, what is my most underrated video? Like, what is to me like my most important lecture I've ever put on YouTube that not necessarily a lot of people have watched? It's the one I did with aristocratic versus democratic republics, because that's something that understanding this change in political culture during the antebellum period, because in the 1830s, you still have some remnants of this old aristocratic political culture. And this is a culture that values deal making, that values civility. Like, one thing when people say that it sure is a shame that we don't have more civility in our politics, I would say that part of this is a side effect of just being a democracy, because democracy is a form of government. It's certainly not ideal. I think Churchill said that it's the worst form of government other than all of the other forms of government. Okay, so the thing about democracy is it naturally puts people against each other, whereas when we think about an aristocratic republic, you're trying to avoid controversies. The corrupt bargain between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams, this is something that they didn't really see a problem with what they were doing. Like, when they looked backward at the political culture of the United States up till then, the idea of making a few deals and keeping this dangerous Andrew Jackson out of the presidency, why shouldn't Henry Clay be rewarded for that? But democratic culture does not like that. So when we think about the 1830s in the Congress, they had something called the gag rule. Okay, I don't know how many of y'all have seen that movie Fight Club, but when they say nobody, rule number one, nobody talks about Fight Club. Slavery was something that they said that nobody talks about slavery. We are not going to talk about it. And so with that, and again, ladies and gentlemen, I will remind y'all that Romulus APUSH review is available at the App Store and Google Play. It's in the top 10 right now in education, and we've still got several days until this, until this happens. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, just wanted to make a note there, and remember that that's just a little trivia app I made, and I think for the low price, it's something that'll be, you can just study all the time. And again, these aren't stimulus-based questions. It's just a little trivia app that'll ask you questions, A, B, C, what was, do you remember the Alamo or something like that? Might ask you that. So with that, we want to note in the 1830s, the annexation of Texas would have caused problems on two levels, okay? The annexation of Texas would cause problems on two levels. First of all, it was going to cause friction between the free and slave states, okay? So actually, I thought I had that open, but I don't. So then it can risk a war with Mexico. So the 1830s, it's basically being non-controversial. We don't talk about slavery in Congress. If Texas wants to come into the United States, we don't want to create that problem, okay? So then there's the 1844 presidential election. And that's where James K. Polk, who had been one of Andrew Jackson's disciples, not very well known, somebody that was called a dark horse because he wasn't who anybody thought would be the next president. But James K. Polk and the Democratic Party in 1844, they went all in on Texas annexation. In the Democratic Party platform, it says we are in favor of the annexation of Texas. Now, the Whig Party platform stayed very quiet about it because a lot of Northeasterners who were kind of the backbone of the Whig Party, they didn't like the idea of bringing in this massive slave state. So Henry Clay, 1844 was really Henry Clay's last, it was his last nomination for the presidency. This is his last chance. I mean, he'd run in 1832, and just, and he's trying, Henry Clay and William Jennings Bryan, those are two guys that they tried. So with that, Henry Clay is running, but Henry Clay wouldn't take a position on Texas. And that was something that, he tried to kind of go back and forth, didn't really go all in one way or the other. So the thing is, if we think about the expansion of democracy in the 1830s, 1840s, what we see here is that, basically the people wanted Texas. It's like Texas wants to come in. Why not? Manifest destiny. Okay, so the election of James K. Polk results in the annexation of Texas, which then results in the Mexican-American War, Mexican Cession, Wilmot Proviso. One thing that's very important is you understand all of these cause and effect relationships. Okay, so that's something that I think is important there, that you're always thinking about what led to what led to what. Okay. Now, if we're comparing the First and Second Great Awakening, one thing here, okay, so we've got Ali who is asking about, how would we compare those things? So comparing the First and Second Great Awakening, what we've got here is that both of them involve emotional preaching. Fire and brimstone, you're going to hell kind of thing, okay? But at the same time, the First Great Awakening, now the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening also both resulted in an increase in non-traditional evangelical denominations like Baptist and Methodist, for example, okay? So as far as that goes, let's see. And then as far as differences, this is something that the main difference is the Second Great Awakening is going to, I'm trying to find something here, but let me focus on that real quick. All right, let's see. I can't find that. Oh well, I'm gonna look for that in. Oh yeah, we've got that. All right, so wait, is that okay? Yep. All right. So with that, let me go ahead and get back to that. So the difference is the Second Great Awakening gave a rise to the antebellum reform movements, okay? Whereas the First Great Awakening was something that, you had the preaching, you had the religious renewal, you had the rise of non-traditional denominations. But other than that, it's not real. I mean, you could say that there is some draw away from the Anglican Church. Somebody could say that the First Great Awakening, there's a causal factor toward the American Revolution, but it's kind of beyond that. It's not the strongest causal relationship. So the biggest difference that I've seen on the exam is they want to make sure that you understand that the Second Great Awakening was something that was a catalyst for antebellum reform. So let me go ahead and go over to the YouTube chat. All right, Taloth likes that backdrop. So somebody asked about Texas in the YouTube chat as well. And so then passed the exam with a 4. Glad I helped you, Raymond. And so as far as that goes, Ashlyn on YouTube is asking, can I review the effects on slavery after the Mexican cession and how it led to the Civil War? I certainly can, okay? So as far as that goes, remember that during the Mexican War, you have the Wilmot Proviso, which is repeatedly introduced in the House of Representatives, okay? So repeatedly introduced, and basically the Wilmot Proviso said that there's not going to be like any slavery, like the United States will not have slavery in any land that is taken from Mexico, okay? So no land that is taken from Mexico is going to be open to slavery, okay? So yeah, we want to hide the message there. All right. So the Wilmot Proviso, okay, so saying that there will be no slavery in any land taken from Mexico. Now, the Wilmot Proviso, strictly speaking, it never passes, okay? It never passes on both houses of Congress. Of course, the Senate's not going to pass that. But the Wilmot Proviso does draw a line in the sand because after 1845, no more slave, like between 1845 and 1860, no more slave states are going to be admitted into the Union. So when we think about free soil, okay, this is something that we want to think about in terms of just like containment. It's very similar to the idea of containment of communism is, you know, when we're thinking about limiting the expansion of slavery. So this all plays in with manifest destiny. So understand that the manifest destiny, this is part of what's leading to the Civil War, because there's not really, before the Civil War, other than the abolitionists, there is not really a large outcry for abolishing slavery in the South. Now, what you have to note as well is that, you know, when we think about the Northern economy was, you know, an economy that was dependent, not directly, but indirectly. Just one second, ladies. All right. So as far as that, you know, free soil, like when we think about the Northern economy, that it was dependent on the Southern economy. If we think about Henry Clay's American system, for example. So if we're going into Henry Clay's American system, let's go ahead and make a little note of that. Okay. So Henry Clay's American system. Yeah, this is something that could be a very, very important thing here. This is after the War of 1812, because remember the old Jeffersonian economic model that, you know, Jefferson was like, basically, let's just do kind of like we were as colonies, except we control it. You know, the British aren't controlling our trade. We are. Jefferson said, we don't need manufacturing in this country. But raw materials from the United States and import British goods from Europe. So we don't need all those filthy, dirty factories, and we can focus on agriculture. And so with that, trade is essential here. And so the War of 1812, Henry Clay, who had been a war hawk, he's saying, look, we need to change some things. So he was like, look, we got some economic things going on and we need to nip it, right? We need to nip it. And so with nip, let me just make sure that I've got the mic on and all that, you know, y'all can see and hear me and all that. Excellent. So you've got to nip it. Now, nip, that is a nice little acronym here. National Bank, internal improvements, protective tariff. One more time, National Bank, internal improvements, protective tariff, okay? And so that's something that Henry Clay, this is his American system. And it's a very Hamiltonian kind of plan. So we note that even though during the era of good feelings, there is no more Federalist Party per se, no political organization known as the Federalist Party, Henry Clay is bringing the Federalist economic program into this Republican Party. And so the goals of the American system to promote self-sufficiency, independence from Europe. Now, one thing I think is important is when you think about the American system as a trade policy, and then you think about the Monroe Doctrine as foreign policy. Both of these are giving, some space. Like the United States is looking west, not toward Europe, that we see the United States moving away from Europe and the development of Western lands. And so basically, Henry Clay sees Southern cash crops as being very, very important for Northern manufacturing. If you've got a textile mill in the North, you are bringing in Southern cotton. So understand that we are seeing some interdependence. So it's not like only the South benefited from slavery, the North benefited from slavery as well. And so when we're thinking about Henry Clay's American system, there's not a lot, the abolitionists never made up a majority in the North, or even before the Civil War, like necessarily a majority of Republicans, because the Republican platform of 1860 was a free soil platform. Now, abolitionists, they want to get rid of slavery everywhere. They want to get rid of slavery now, and they have moral reasons for wanting to do that. Free soilers, they want to stop the westward expansion of slavery. And often, they were just, instead of just moral concern for the slaves, a lot of these people were racist and they were conscious of their economic situation. They didn't want to live around Black people. They didn't want to compete with slave labor. And so now abolitionism and free soil are both anti-slavery movements, but they are different. And so we see that free soil after the Mexican-American War, that becomes the new guideline. So when we're thinking about, for example, the Compromise of 1850, okay, that Henry Clay and Stephen Douglas, that what are we going to do with the Mexican cession? And so when we're thinking about the Compromise of 1850, California as a free state. Now, this is a hard pill to swallow for the South, okay, because California, that's a big state. Southern congressmen are asking, well, why isn't this a North, two states, a slave state and a free state? The free soilers, they don't want any slavery in the West. And so in order to get this passed, the deal that is struck is to strengthen the Fugitive Slave Law. So to pass the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, which replaces the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, and this puts the federal government in charge of enforcing the laws when it comes to fugitive slaves, rather than the state just returning a fugitive slave, which wasn't happening a lot of times. Now, we want to note that this stronger fugitive slave law, this was by far the most controversial part of the Compromise of 1850. Popular sovereignty. This was a plan that, instead of Congress saying whether there will be slavery in the Mexican cession, let's let settlers decide that question. Texas, there was a boundary dispute between the federal government and Texas. So the way that they solved this, the federal government often solves conflicts with the states this way. Let's just put a little federal money in their hands so that Texas can pay their war debt. $10 million, now that was a lot of money at that time. I know y'all are thinking like, I can make $10 million in 5 seconds. But, back then that was a lot of money. And then abolish the slave trade in Washington, D.C. Not abolish slavery itself. That happened, I think, in 1864. I think that the Congress abolished slavery in Washington, D.C., but abolishing the slave trade in Washington, D.C. That basically so that when we've got foreign visitors and people that are, diplomats in Washington, D.C., that they're not seeing the embarrassing spectacle of slave auctions. So with that, the Compromise of 1850 was Henry Clay's last compromise that earned him the title of the Great Compromiser, whereas the first one was the Missouri Compromise. Now, I wrote a little song about Henry Clay. Some of y'all might want to hear it. I don't know if y'all want to hear the song or not, but we've got here Lilac asking, "Where's the American System song?" Okay, I think I can arrange that. Okay, so let's see. Are y'all ready for this? Y'all let me know. Y'all want to see the y'all want to hear the song? All right, so let's go ahead and see what we can do here. Yes, play the song. All right, Frank, let's go ahead and play the song. All right, so y'all can't really see the guitar, I guess, but I'll try to hold it up here so that y'all, Elroy knows the chorus. All right, so let's go ahead and get that going. And again, this is about Henry Clay. Oh, wait. Okay. All right. Woke up in the morning after a night at the saloon. Went to the House of Representatives with my pal John C. Calhoun. This embargo isn't helping us protect ourselves, but it looks like Madison finally listened, and now we're in the War of 1812. Turns out we weren't as prepared for war as I thought we might have been. The British burned down the White House, much to our chagrin. Sure, it ended well at New Orleans. Yeah, that was quite a win. But for our economic future, we need to focus within. Yesterday's economy was based on foreign trade. We can achieve economic independence, then we'll have it made. Come on now, Roy. Internal improvements, national bank, national bank, national bank. Internal improvements, national bank. Protective tariff, ride some, build some west. Yeah, ride some steamy boats, steamy boats, yeah. Steamy boats, steamy boats, and build some western roads, western roads, yeah. Western roads, west. Well, I woke one morning and I looked up to see the United States had built a national economy. Jimmy signed into law a second national bank supporting economic growth, and y'all got Henry Clay to thank. Then internal improvements, bridges, roads, and canals to connect all the sections, gonna make us all pals. A protective tariff to build home industry. Our economy won't have to count on British sympathy. Why cross the Atlantic, travel out of our zone when we can build factories and make stuff right here at home? Now I know the South's not eager, no, they're not on my side, because they grow cotton over the world and they ship it far and wide. In 1828, they said that tariff's too high, and John C. turned on me and Carolina nullified. But I said to Calhoun, you got nothing to fear. Ship your cotton up north and we'll process it here. The American system is pursuing a goal, build a home economy free from foreign control, and ride some steamy boats, steamy boats, yeah. Steamy boats, steamy boats, and build some western roads, western roads, yeah. Western roads, west. Internal improvements, national bank, national bank. Internal improvements, national bank. Protective tariff, ride some steamy boats, steamy boats, yeah. Steamy boats, steamy boats, and build some western roads, western roads, yeah. Western roads, western roads, build some western roads. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hope y'all enjoyed that. Probably going to be about 15 super chats there in the YouTube chat, huh? All right, so I tell you, that was a lot of fun. I'm literally Taylor Swift, huh? Wow, that was I guess that was probably meant as a compliment, if I had to guess there, Ava. So, you know, I actually had some of my actual students saw Taylor Swift not too long ago. So, as far as that goes, great. Y'all have y'all got what you came to hear, and with that, Ava, Dred Scott versus Sanford. Okay, Dred Scott versus Sanford. And that was, of course, like one of the most infamous Supreme Court decisions that's ever been made. So Dred Scott, you know, was a slave whose master brought him to, I believe, you know, Illinois, I think, for a bit, which was a free state, and to Wisconsin, you know, which was a free territory, right? So as far as that goes, you know, basically Dred Scott said, look, like my master brought me into free territory and didn't just bring me there, because there were times where, for example, during the harvest season, there would be some, you know, some slaveholders that had farmland in Kentucky and in Illinois, and they would bring their slaves into Illinois to help with the harvest, then take them back to Kentucky. And so that had already been pretty much determined as legal. But with Dred Scott, his master just brought him and they lived there for like 4 years. And so Dred Scott says, I mean, I should be free by now, right? And the Supreme Court said, I mean, it was really just really offensive in the sense that, first of all, it was just Dred Scott, why are you here? Because, you know, somebody of African descent cannot be a citizen of the United States. Now, the Constitution never says this, but there were laws on the books previously that had been passed by Congress that defined citizenship in terms of being of the white race. But as far as that goes, the Constitution never ties citizenship to, you know, someone's race. And, you know, so Dred Scott says that, you know, you're not a citizen of the United States. And then on the other hand, the Supreme Court doubles down and says, we are, you know, we're going to rule here that the federal government cannot close federal territories to slavery. Now, the Supreme Court stopped short of saying that a free state can't be a free state, but the Supreme Court said that the federal government cannot close territories to slavery because that basically limits the rights of slaveholders to live in those territories and to use the land there. And so basically now there's no such thing. After Dred Scott, there's no such thing about compromising. So this is a humongous blow to the free soil movement, because the free soil movement was all about, you know, getting, you know, slave. Oh my goodness, simple. But with that, you know, so with that, this is something that, you know, was an infamous Supreme Court decision, and it echoed down into the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Okay, so the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Lincoln put Stephen Douglas in a very bad spot. Okay, now, first of all, Lincoln used the Dred Scott decision to, you know, basically promote himself as a Republican candidate. That he said, you know, in his House Divided speech, he said, well, if the Supreme Court can say that there aren't going to be any free territories, what's to stop the Supreme Court from saying that, you know, what's to stop the Supreme Court from saying that you can't have a free state? Okay, so with this, you know, with this, that Lincoln in his House Divided speech plays on Northern fears that, you know, the next thing the Supreme Court might do is just say there are no free states. Now, the odds that the Supreme Court would have actually ruled something like that would have been slim to none, but Abraham Lincoln was able to use that as a political issue to gain support for the Republican Party. Now, he also put Stephen Douglas on the spot and asked Stephen Douglas, because remember, Stephen Douglas was a popular sovereignty guy. And Lincoln asked Stephen Douglas, well, what if there's a community out in the Western Territories that says that, you know, out in the Western Territories that says we don't want slavery in our immediate community? And Stephen Douglas is placed in this position that if he fully endorsed Dred Scott and said that they can't decide that, then he could lose the election for the Senate, because that would tick off people in Illinois. But then if he said that they can say that there's no slavery in our community, that will make him unelectable, like where no Southern Democrat will ever vote for him. And so Stephen Douglas had to think about, well, I got to win this race before I can think about running for the presidency. And so Stephen Douglas, he says, yeah, this community of people could decide they don't want slavery in their immediate community. And that's, what they call the Freeport Doctrine. And so Stephen Douglas, basically, he wins the battle, but in 1860, Abraham Lincoln wins the war. That Abraham Lincoln basically put the nail in Stephen Douglas's presidential coffin. Yes, the Freeport Doctrine, very good. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that y'all have, enjoyed this review session. I hope that y'all found it helpful. I'm going to be doing reviews all week. Okay, so same links. If you're on YouTube, I'm going to be on the YouTube channel at the same time every evening. This is going to be at 6:30 every evening. I'm going to be on YouTube doing APUSH. Okay, so that's going to be happening. And so just know that that is the case. And tomorrow, the plan is the progressive era, the Gilded Age and the progressive era. That will be the main focus. And then Wednesday, a foreign policy free for all. And then Thursday will just be an everything free for all. Okay, so Thursday at 6:30, I'll be taking questions, from about anything in the APUSH course. Lily, I'm very glad to see that you are, that you're getting some notes and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that is awesome. And just keep in mind, I will be back every evening. And remember, if y'all want a handy little study tool that is very inexpensive, Romulus APUSH Review is available at the App Store, Google Play, just a little $2.99 trivia app. So just keep that in mind if you're wanting a little tool to study. And I look forward to hopefully seeing y'all again tomorrow. It is always a pleasure.